Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're cutting right through the crazy computer science jargon and honestly all the overwhelming financial hype to reveal the simple, logical steps behind the evolution of digital money. Look, if you've ever felt like Bitcoin is just for tech wizards or Wall Street insiders, you are absolutely in the right place. We're going to break this whole thing down using clear, everyday concepts so you can finally grasp exactly what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why it actually matters to the global economy.
Just imagine this for a second. Imagine waking up to a reality where you can send money to someone on the exact opposite side of the globe in just a matter of minutes. And you do it completely bypassing traditional banks, those awful waiting periods, and the hefty international fees. Imagine holding a form of money that literally cannot be printed endlessly by governments, giving you absolute total control over your own finances. Well, this isn't science fiction, right? This is the core revolutionary promise of Bitcoin. All right, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. The evolution of money, 2. What Bitcoin actually is, 3. How the network works, 4. Wallets, ownership, and investing, and finally, 5. Global impact and risks. Let's dive right in.
Starting off with Section 1, the evolution of money, tracing the history of value.
You know, Bitcoin really isn't just some random internet fad, it's actually the next logical step in human history. If you look back thousands of years ago, we relied on the barter system, which, let's be honest, was terrible because it required both people to want exactly what the other person had. So we evolved. We moved to commodity money, like salt or shells, and eventually to gold and silver coins. Now, those were great for holding value, but they were incredibly heavy to carry around. That eventually led us to paper money and modern banking, a system built entirely for convenience. But as we're going to see, that convenience came with a massive trade-off, and that trade-off was centralized control. So Bitcoin, which launched in 2009, is simply the internet age's answer to the historical limitations of paper and heavy metals. To truly grasp why 2009 was such a massive turning point, we really have to look back at the 2008 global financial crisis. Banks collapsed, millions of people lost their jobs, and governments printed astronomical amounts of money to bail out the exact same institutions that caused the crash in the first place. The flaws of centralized banking became painfully, undeniably obvious. Traditional banking inherently requires trusted intermediaries and it's highly prone to inflation. In direct contrast to that, Bitcoin was proposed by the mysterious Satoshi Nakamoto as a completely decentralized peer-to-peer alternative, meaning no central bank, no bailouts, and a strictly limited supply of exactly 21 million coins. That's it. Moving right along to Section 2, what Bitcoin actually is, because it is way more than just internet cash. Okay, so Bitcoin is simultaneously digital money, a global network, and a scarce asset. But the glue holding that whole shebang together is the concept of a trustless system. Now, I know, trustless sounds kind of sketchy, right? Like a bad thing, but it's actually Bitcoin's greatest superpower. In traditional finance, you basically have to blindly trust your bank to secure your funds, and you have to trust governments not to devalue your currency. Bitcoin replaces that flawed human trust with unbreakable mathematics and cryptography. The technology itself enforces the rules, which means you don't need to know or trust the person you're transacting with, and you definitely don't need a bank sitting in the middle taking a cut.
Now, we've got to bust a huge myth right here, because this is super interesting. I hear people say all the time, man, I can't afford Bitcoin. One coin is way too expensive. But listen, you don't need to buy a whole Bitcoin. Just like a single dollar can be divided into 100 cents, one Bitcoin is highly divisible into 100 million smaller units, and these are called Satoshis, named after its creator. This means you can buy or send $5, $50, or $50,000 worth. It makes the asset universally accessible to anyone, absolutely regardless of your income level.
All right, let's open the hood. Section 3. How the network works, the mechanics of the blockchain. The absolute foundation of this entire network is the blockchain. And please don't let the tech jargon intimidate you here. Think of the blockchain exactly like a giant classroom notebook, where every single Bitcoin transaction is permanently recorded. But here's the genius part. Instead of the teacher keeping the one and only copy of the notebook, which, could easily be altered or destroyed or lost, every single student in the classroom holds an identical, continuously updated copy of that exact same notebook. So if one person tries to cheat and erase a transaction, all the other notebooks instantly expose the fraud. In the Bitcoin network, thousands of computers globally act as those students, making it virtually impossible to hack or manipulate the record.
So let's trace the exact steps and see how this actually works when you hit send. First, step 1, you create the transaction right in your app.
Step 2, your app applies a digital signature, basically proving mathematically that you actually own the funds. Step 3, that request is broadcast out to the entire global network. Then we hit Step 4, the mining and verification stage. This is where high-powered computers compete to solve really complex mathematical puzzles to validate your transaction, just ensuring you aren't trying to spend money you don't actually have. And finally, Step 5, your verified transaction is locked into a block and permanently added to the blockchain. The whole thing happens and the money arrives in minutes.
Moving on to Section 4, wallets, ownership, and investing. Taking control of your digital wealth.
People always ask me, where does my Bitcoin actually live? Well, it lives on the blockchain. What your personal wallet actually holds are your keys. Think of your public key exactly like your house address. You can safely share it with anyone in the world so they can drop off funds, no problem. But your private key, that is exactly like your physical house key. Whoever holds that key can open the door and take absolutely everything inside. You must protect your private key, which is usually represented as a 12 or 24-word seed phrase, literally with your life.
And that brings us to the most famous golden rule in the entire digital asset space. Not your keys, not your coins. See, if you leave your Bitcoin sitting on a centralized exchange platform, they hold the private keys. If they go bankrupt or get hacked, you might lose everything. Taking your Bitcoin off the exchange and putting it into a personal wallet gives you absolute freedom over your wealth. But remember, and this is absolutely crucial, absolute freedom means absolute responsibility. There is no customer service line to call, and there is definitely no forgot password button in Bitcoin. If you lose your keys, your wealth is permanently gone.
Now, because of its fixed supply and shifting global demand, Bitcoin's price is, as we all know, highly volatile. It goes through massive, predictable boom and bust cycles. Because of that, smart investors rely on structured strategies, rather than just treating it like a Vegas casino. The most popular strategy by far is dollar cost averaging, or DCA, where you just buy a small fixed amount regularly, say $20 a week, completely regardless of what the price is doing. This naturally smooths out the volatility. Combine that strategy with long-term holding, famously known in the community as hodling, using offline cold wallets for security, and strictly avoiding emotional panic selling, and you essentially have the blueprint used by seasoned investors to survive and thrive through the market cycles. Finally, Section 5, Global Impact and Risks. Let's look at Bitcoin in the real world.
In places like the US or Europe, Bitcoin is pretty often just seen as an investment vehicle to get rich, but we need to consider its profound utility everywhere else. For millions of people in emerging markets, Bitcoin is literally an essential tool for survival. In the Philippines, it's being used to slash the crazy fees on cross-border remittances so families can actually keep more of the money they're sent. In Argentina, citizens use it as a life raft to protect their hard-earned savings from severe, crippling inflation. In Nigeria, it allows freelance workers to instantly receive global payments without dealing with banking blockades. Bitcoin is actively driving real financial inclusion for the unbanked. All you need is a basic smartphone and an internet connection to immediately plug into the global economy.
However, as an impartial explainer, it is super vital that we acknowledge this system is not perfect. It carries very real, tangible risks. The extreme price volatility can easily wipe out short-term traders. The space is unfortunately still rife with scams, phishing links, and fraudulent platforms that prey specifically on beginners. We've already discussed the devastating reality of permanently losing your private keys. And beyond the individual level, there are massive, ongoing macro debates regarding the heavy environmental energy consumption required for Bitcoin mining, not to mention the looming uncertainty of how different global governments will choose to regulate or potentially even restrict this technology in the coming years.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this final thought. Is Bitcoin the ultimate future of global money, destined to become the world's reserve currency? Or is it simply the foundational first step, the digital gold that anchors an entirely new Web3 financial economy? Whatever the answer turns out to be, it is undeniable that a simple 9-page paper published back in 2008 by a person literally no one has ever met completely reshaped the world's definition of money. Now that you understand the mechanics, the real-world utility, and the risks, the real power is in your hands. I highly encourage you to take this foundational knowledge and continue your own research. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the technology of trust.